Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today for our Rise of CyberAI webinar. My name is Gerald Brady, and I'm a Managing Director here at SVB, and I'm delighted to welcome you today. As you'll hear shortly, our CyberAI research report shines a light on one of the fastest growing areas of venture capital today. But the flip side of this is the scale and depth of new cyber attacks that we're seeing. And you may have seen in the press the deepfake attack that Arab experienced recently, or yesterday's cyber attack on the UK's health service. Before I hand over to my colleague, Andrew McCarty, who will run through some of the key findings from our report, let me touch on a few of the housekeeping items and today's agenda. First, everyone's lines have been muted to prevent background noise. Secondly, if you want to turn off closed captioning, please click on the live transcript button on the Zoom bar below. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function that you'll see on the Zoom bar as well. And we'll be recording today's event and we'll share the link after the webinar's finished. And then finally, we'll send a link to everyone of the report after the event, and do feel free to share this report with other people in your community and network. In a moment, we'll hear from Andrew, and then my colleague, Natalie Fratto, will lead a conversation with Patrick Heim from Sin Ventures and Bob Tinker, CEO and co-founder of BlueRock. Today, SVB is banking over 700 cybersecurity companies, from raw startups to public companies. The scale of our cyber clients gives us a unique lens on the cyber market today. While funding for cyber companies was tougher in 23, as was venture as a whole, we have seen cyber funding recover strongly in Q1 to $2.7 billion. And we continue to see strength this quarter. We're seeing cyber M&A return, and cyber spend continues to be the key priority for enterprise CIOs. To our clients and VC investors and our CISO friends, thank you for your continued support. As many of you have heard before, cybersecurity is the ultimate team sport, and we're grateful for all of you for all that you do to protect us. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. My name is Andrew McCarty. Welcome, everybody. I'm a vice president on our enterprise software relationship management team based here in San Francisco. So to put a quick shameless plug in, if you're on the line and that sounds like it might be relevant to you and you're interested in having a conversation, our team would love to speak with you. Moving into the report itself, though, if we can go to the next slide. We start our report by revisiting the moment a year and a half ago now where ChatGPT was released and seemingly burst GenAI onto the public consciousness. And it's certainly true that, speaking for myself personally, that was a bit of a light bulb moment in terms of my own realization of the implications of that technology. But I think that people on the know better than most that GenAI and the underlying technological advances that powered and enabled it didn't happen overnight, but are born on the back of long-term trends. In terms of the intersection of GenAI and cybersecurity that we're looking at in this report, there are a couple of trends that we're really interested in. The first is the shift toward automation here on the top. And that's true no matter if you look at it in terms of company size, although it becomes more true as companies get larger, as I think we would probably expect. It's also true across sectors as well. It's worth calling out that this speaks to AI generally rather than GenAI specifically, but I think it's fair to say, given the adoption trends towards GenAI, the trend, I'm sure, holds. Looking at the bottom here, we're also seeing a real increase in spend towards cybersecurity in response to a real proliferation of cyber threats. You could honestly pick your stat when it comes to measuring the increase in cyber threats. I'll just throw out a couple, looking at the bottom right here, which tracks aggregate losses due to cybercrime in the United States. We saw that those losses doubled from 2019 to 2021, and then doubled again from 2021 to 2023. We don't have it called out in this slide here, but we do speak to it in our broader report. there was a 13-fold increase of inbound phishing attacks last year in 2023, which I think is a real geometric increase that we can lay, if not exclusively, then largely at the feet of the proliferation of GenAI and the threats that are stemming from that. We can go to the next slide. So I think the first thing that jumps out to me here, at the risk of being overly reductive, is just the massive spike in AI investment. That's certainly true if you look at the bottom left graphic here, which tracks dollar investment. And we see a massive spike, 163% increase over the past several years. What I think is perhaps even more interesting, though, is this graphic on the top here, which tracks the percentage of all VC deals that deals in a given technology were included in. And what that shows, or why I think that's interesting, I should say, for AI in particular, is that strips out the big boulder investments, right? The open AIs, right? The businesses out there that are commanding massive amounts of capital for very capital intensive businesses. This strips that out and instead looks at the deal count that's going towards a given technology. And what that shows is that even independent of the massive boulder deals that we see, there's been a huge rush towards investment in AI, not just over the past couple of years, but over the past decade plus. I think there's a similarly interesting story to be told when looking at cybersecurity investment. When I first looked at this, I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit surprised because I expected to see more of a spike in investment into cybersecurity, just given the trends that we've seen in the threat landscape that we highlighted in the last slide. But upon looking at it and reflecting on it a little bit further, I think there's actually a real story to be told here of the resiliency of the cybersecurity space and investment into cybersecurity. First, there has been a meaningful increase in cybersecurity investment dollars over the past several years. We see not quite on the same scale as AI investment, of course, but still a robust increase. And then on the top, we've seen the percentage VC deals that are being raised going towards cybersecurity remain remarkably consistent over time. And I think that again speaks to the resiliency as we're seeing this massive spike in deals going towards AI. We're not seeing any of that being pulled out of cybersecurity, which I think again speaks to how much need there is for these types of tools, products, offerings, and the recognition that from the investment community that there are good outcomes to be had. Thinking briefly about exits. So when we're conceptualizing this report, we thought it would be more interesting rather than looking at cyber AI exits historically, since this is an emerging space without too much in the way of exit activity that we can point to historically just quite yet. And instead, we thought it would be a little bit more interesting to speak with some VC friends who we have close relationships with and have years of experience in this space, and wanted to see what their expectations are around exits going forward. And so we pulled a couple of quotations there here on the bottom right. And I think the consensus is fair to say is that we are, yes, of course, in the very early innings of what may be a dramatic platform shift. But I think it's fair to say that there has been a proliferation of good exits in the cybersecurity industry as a whole, for a number of reasons, of course. But I think as much as anything else, there's a long tail of product development within cybersecurity, of course. And from the acquirer side, it's often easier to just buy a new tool or capability, especially as the threat landscape is always evolving, instead of developing it in-house. I think it's fair to say that those dynamics are very similar for cyber AI. And so I think that it's fair to set a baseline expectation that there will be similar proliferation of good exits as companies are filling the need that this new landscape presents. Let's move on to the next slide. Speaking of the landscape, this is our cyber AI landscape. a quick note on methodology. For this analysis, we took a look at pitch book companies that are coded with AI, ML, and cybersecurity as their primary vertical. And that's just based on PitchBook's definitions. And then we went one by one through the companies that it spat out because we found that PitchBook can be a little bit loose with how they classify certain companies. And so we filtered out individual companies who fell outside of the core intersection that we're looking at. Lastly, international companies and ones that aren't privately VC backed. And that's what we did, a similar methodology across the three sectors here to get a more like for like comparison. We define cyber AI as tools and platforms that leverage GenAI to address vulnerabilities in AI infrastructure, models, and applications, or to defend against external AI-driven threats and attacks. We're pretty confident that this definition covers the vast majority of cyber AI businesses, effectively cybersecurity businesses that are powered by or defend against GenAI. But this is an emerging space, and I think there are interesting conversations to be had around the edges, around where there might be tangential spaces that may not map neatly onto cybersecurity, but map onto perhaps cyber AI. Shooting a little bit from the hip, but thinking, for instance, of categories that are more explicitly focused on data, like data observability, as something that may not fall into cybersecurity, but has implications around data protection, data hygiene that may map onto cyber AI. But this is, as we're thinking about it, this is an exciting and emerging space with some exciting and emerging names. We highlight a few of them here. I'll give a special shout out to Panther and Certic, who are a pair of SVB clients. But zooming the lens out a little bit, I think some key takeaways here are, again, an emerging landscape that is evolving as the technology around it and the technological, threats that it's trying to address also evolve. As the space emerges, I think that we may also start to see the lines between cyber AI and cybersecurity start to blur a little bit. Particularly with the M&A dynamics that we see within cybersecurity, as some of the more established cybersecurity players start to either build out their own capabilities or acquire them to address this intersection. We may be talking about, months from now, a year from now, about the largest established cybersecurity players emerging as the largest established cyber AI players as well. We may honestly be seeing those dynamics begin to play out now. Palo Alto Networks' acquisition of Dig Security last year comes to mind as something that positions them perhaps a little bit more explicitly in this intersection. And then Wiz's $1 billion raise last month, which is ostensibly for acquisitions. We would expect on that acquisition roadmap to see cyber AI that may end up positioning them as one of the leaders within cyber AI. And go to the next slide. So it's a little bit, maybe perhaps a little bit dorky to say, but this is my favorite slide in the report because this, to me, functions as a big blinking road sign for the massive amount of opportunity that there is here for cyber AI businesses. So we had the opportunity to leverage our network to put together and conduct a proprietary CISO survey because ultimately, these are the people who are driving adoption, making decisions around this space. And so we were really curious, first and foremost, to see what sorts of adjustments they have made and expect to make. So if we look at the top left here, despite the fact that we are only about a year and a half into Gen AI being on the public consciousness, we've seen that more than 3 out of the 4 CISOs that we polled have already adjusted their cybersecurity stacks in response to Gen AI. So I think that both speaks to how quickly CISOs move, but also, frankly, what we were getting into at the start of the report, that this is, while something that maybe emerged on the public consciousness only within the past year and a half or so, is something that has been on security professionals' radar for much longer than that. On the top right here, we see, we'd like to call the attention to this bottom bar here, right? There's a good chunk, about 1 out of 4 CISOs who we talked to, who said that they have not yet adjusted their cybersecurity stack in response to GenAI. And nearly all of those who have not yet made any adjustments expect to within the next 3 years. And that to us is again, a big blinking road sign and validation, frankly, for the need and the opportunity that is there for cyber AI businesses to come in and fill this gap that CISOs are telling us is there. On the bottom here, we see an average of 13% expected budget increase from cybersecurity professionals in response to GenAI. And then when we ask CISOs, what are the tools that you're using right now, and just left it open-ended, we see that it is completely, it's all over the map, it's totally fragmented right now. And so we're seeing most security professionals having already responded, but nearly all of those who have not already responded to GenAI expect to within the next couple of years. We're seeing increased budget explicitly for GenAI, and we're seeing a fragmented landscape in terms of the tools and platforms and capabilities that are being used right now. All of that to me says that there is a ton of need and opportunity, and we would expect that cyber AI startups and technologies to step up and fill that gap. So we can go to the next slide. That's all we have to walk through the report. I'd like to quickly shout out my co-authors, Emma and Natalie. It was amazing partnering with you both on this, as well as with Andrew and Jake on our market insights team, who frankly make us look a lot smarter than we probably deserve to. But it's been an amazing experience getting to work with you all on this. And for those on the line, if you have any further questions or you want to continue this conversation or just do a deeper dive, my email is here. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. And if you haven't already, please feel free to download, share the report. We love to use it as an opportunity to start conversations around the space. With that, I would like to pull up Natalie to lead our panel discussion and bring us into the second half of the webinar.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew. That was a great breakdown of the report. I'm Natalie Fratto, a managing director on SVB's investor coverage and business development team, and as Andrew mentioned, another co-author on the report. Today we have a very special panel group of 2 individuals that we actually asked for their insights as part of the report as well, based on the many years of experience they have both in cyber and applied AI. So let me give their backgrounds a bit before I bring them on stage. First, we have Patrick Heim, who is a co-founder and partner of Sin Ventures. He's also partner and chief information security officer at Clear Sky Security, and he brings more than 2 decades of experience in security with executive roles at Dropbox, Salesforce, and Kaiser Permanente, just to name a few. Welcome, Patrick. And then we're also joined by Bob Tinker, CEO and co-founder of BlueRock, formerly known as Bedrock Systems, and a managing partner at Metamorph Ventures. Prior to BlueRock, Bob was the founder and CEO of Mobile Iron, where he started it and from inception took it to over $150 million in revenue, 12,000 enterprise customers, and an IPO in 2014. Welcome both Patrick and Bob.
Thank you.
Before we dive into today and the meat of the report, I thought it would be wise to kind of turn the clock back a bit, since you both have many years of seeing where these 2 worlds intersect. Want to talk about what happened before the release of ChatGPT, if we want to for a second. So Bob, let's start with you. I know that BlueRock was founded in 2017, so long before ChatGPT's release. I'm super curious just to hear a little bit more about, at the company's inception, were you already thinking about AI as a threat to protect against? And then since that point, how much has both product adoption and also product strategy changed in the wake of the Gen AI boom?
Yeah, so you're right. BlueRock was started in 2017. And, when we started the business, that our mission was to solve one of the great unsolved problems in cybersecurity, which is runtime. Runtime security is just not very well solved. And our goal was, hey, how do we protect the company's most valuable workloads? Candidly, in the beginning, AI was not on the list because I think for most large enterprise companies in 2017, 2018, 2019, protecting their AI workloads was not top of the list. But over the course of the last 24 months, that's changed. And our customers began to tell us that, hey, look, GenAI workloads are very likely to become some of the most valuable workloads we have. So we got led into securing GenAI workloads by customer interest. And I wish we could say that we predicted it, but like any early stage company, you listen to your customers. The other part of your question, which is how did our product thinking shift? There's sort of really two things that I've seen there. The first one is along this thread that AI workloads are going to become, again, some of those valuable workloads for attackers to target. The industry is really just waking up to that. And I think one of the particular challenges here is that GenAI apps and workloads are so cutting edge and so new that security has not really been part of the thinking when they were built. And so right now, I think customers are focused on securing the data. The next thing they're going to be focused on is securing the model. And what I'm hearing from CISOs is that they are really just now starting to recognize that traditional security tools won't really work to protect GenAI workloads. They're not just another workload. They're built differently. They run differently. They run on a GPU, which is totally different. So I think there's going to be a whole new class of both opportunities and challenges that CISOs are going to be dealing with.
And Patrick, before starting Ventures, we know that you led trust and safety at Dropbox and Salesforce, both major SaaS players. Was AI on the radar at those companies back in the day? And again, how much has that shifted and evolved in the last few years?
I love the question because it lets me be a historian and look back in time. And kind of as a security practitioner, a lot of us are a little bit skeptical because this isn't the first AI hype cycle we've been through. So if we wind back the clock to around 2012 or so, a company called Silence introduced the concept of AI into the anti-malware space. And initially it was poo-pooed, and then there was adoption, and then all of a sudden, a few years later, everything became AI-driven security. I remember at the RSA conference, it was almost a joke that everybody went through the AI route. And kind of like everything in the Gartner hype cycle, wouldn't say trough of disillusionment, but folks adapted, the attackers adapted, and it became an embedded capability. But when we use the term AI, then it was predominantly machine learning. And we have to remember when we say AI, it's an umbrella for a number of different technologies, not just, I think, what we've seen recently with large language models. So, this has been for a long time. So I would say we are a little bit skeptical around how LLMs are going to transform security, because I look at it as attack and defense. This is not just linear evolution of a technology for productivity purposes. It's you're actively opposing an attacker that also has resources to invest in AI, and they are investing in AI. And I would say the most recent, I'd say example, not specifically related to AI, but related to just kind of like that attack and defense that's going on. It's right now, the conflict in Ukraine, we ship them our weapon systems, and we frankly don't know how well they operate against a near-peer adversary until they're actually put into production. And, recently we sent them some 155 millimeter guided artillery shells called Excaliburs, and we're finding they're actively being jammed in the Ukrainian theater. So what's going to happen is that they adapted, we adapt, they adapt, we adapt. So fundamentally, when I look at AI and cybersecurity, it's just another capability layer that both sides are going to adopt. It's going to be an ongoing cat and mouse game. So I am skeptical that it's going to be massively transformative, but it will drive acceleration.
I think that's a great lead in to the next question here. So when we thought about the report, we really tried to define sort of this murky but emerging intersection between the two worlds of cybersecurity and AI. That's the chart that Andrew showed that we affectionately call the COVID chart. Looks a little bit, viral to us. But I'm curious, from listening to Andrew's presentation and reading the report yourselves, how would you define cyber AI? Is there something we missed? What are the most exciting parts of that intersection point? This is to either Patrick or Bob.
You're not going to like what I'm going to say, but I don't like the term cyber AI. I do believe that it's an embedded capability. It's not a new category. God, I mean, it's like if Gartner adds a new category, I'm going to barf in the cybersecurity world. And the same way as this way, we just need to think about it as it's a technology capability that's going to be embedded in almost everything that we do. So I don't like creation of new categories.
I love that answer. Bob?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about Patrick's point about calling it a category. That's a fair point. The way so this is a great question. I think there's a lot here in terms of changes that are going to be introduced. I sort of divide it into 4 buckets. The first one is just Patrick called it the cat and mouse. I've been calling it sort of the AI arms race. You're going to see attackers like dark AI use AI to accelerate their attacks, and then the defenders are going to need to embed AI to defend. So you're just going to see this arms race escalation there. So that's sort of bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 is more looking at it from the company's point of view, who are actually in the process of adopting some type of GenAI and putting it in production. This is, how do you protect and control the data in AI? This classically wasn't sort of thought of as like a cybersecurity problem, to the earlier point made by Andrew, but protecting and controlling the data in AI is going to be a really big deal. And it's actually the biggest thing that I see enterprises worried about right now. And, there's companies out there like security.ai, which are trying to build like a data command center to do that. The third bucket is actually protecting the AI models themselves. That's a new topic that we are starting to see a lot of customers express interest in, because they're going to be really important workloads. That's where Bedrock, now BlueRock, plays. And there's arguably sort of a 4th bucket, which is kind of new. And I haven't seen a category or a space like this evolve, where it's going to be more around governance of AI, like being able to do things like explainability. Like, this is a new thing. And it's going to Patrick's point, change a lot of different parts of how people do what they do. So it's really going to be the AI arms race, protecting the data, protecting the runtime, and dealing with governance. Those are sort of the 4 buckets that I think about it in.
Great. In the report, our survey data showed that more than 2/3 of the CISOs report that GenAI is of something among their top 5 priorities for the upcoming year. They're clearly feeling pressure to act. And of those, maybe 74% said they'd already changed their cybersecurity stack in the last 18 months. Patrick, I think this is a good question for you. Can you unpack some of the factors behind this? Where are they feeling that pressure from? What would you have them do?
First of all, I think CISOs have a really interesting role because it's all around force prioritization. Most companies have almost an infinitely large attack surface, meaning ways that they can be compromised. And there are limited resources to protect that. So, if you ask me to define the role of a CISO, it's the role of being a prioritization engine based on best knowledge. So that said, when you ask, like, how is AI prioritized, there are different factors that come into play. Now, one of them is related to what's the actual risk that you're trying to solve, that you're trying to address. And the other large category is regulations, of course, which is kind of a must-have. And then a third really comes down to, I would say, the hype factor and what your boss's boss reads in the Wall Street Journal and tells you to focus on, which hopefully falls into a far lower category than the other 2. But when we look at the actual risk factors around AI adoption, the leading factor right now, I think, is governance, meaning that you need to have an understanding, because there is so much velocity on the business side to adopt various AI models and capabilities, that you create governance, guardrails, and controls. The old adage is basically, why does a car need brakes? So you can drive fast. Okay, so that's the same thing in this situation, which is there is a huge amount of desire to implement AI to transform business, but it has to be done with rational controls. That said, lower tier priorities, as Bob mentioned, there are also attacks against models. Honestly, we don't see a lot of evidence that that's happening now, at least. Maybe in a year or so, but right now I think it's primarily like researchers trying to identify weaknesses in models and whatnot. But the bad guys can achieve their objectives, whether that's taking over systems, being profitable, whatever, using good old-fashioned traditional means of compromising systems. They don't have to apply rocket science tech of attacking the models themselves quite yet. That may come later on. But as a force prioritization, I see that the focus on AI visibility, governance, guardrails, some elements of controls are probably more important right now than the hardcore security elements.
Bob, does that prioritization stack, I like that, visibility, governance, and then, a few others to follow, does that track with what you're seeing in the buyers for BlueRock?
It does. So I think it does for one set of customers we talk to, but it does not with the other set. So the way I've seen customers sort of divide themselves effectively into sort of two buckets. One is the ones who are effectively kind of experimenting with GenAI. And the other one is the people who are actually really sort of building and deploying their own models and applications at scale. And I see very different behaviors depending on sort of which bucket those customers are in. If they're in the experimenting bucket, I totally agree with Patrick that they're mostly concerned about data security, controls, governance, sort of the basic stuff. If they are more advanced and they're actually, people that are running big models in production, I see a lot more sophistication in terms of how they're thinking about it, and is it different? Yes and no. I think they're recognizing it as one of their top priority applications to protect and the data in it to protect. So, if you're somebody like a Facebook, you focus very, very carefully on protecting your large AI model that drives a huge amount of your ad revenue. The thing that's sort of also kind of an interesting macro trend here, and this is fascinating actually, that CISOs are actually creating working groups around AI because what they're recognizing is AI is not just a security thing, even though they're looking at it from the security perspective. It cuts across security, it cuts across development, it cuts across HR, policy. They're spending time training their teams on how to use this stuff. And, I would liken this sort of work group focus thing. The only other times I've seen this in the past was the adoption of mobile in 2009 when mobile showed up and everybody thought it was this small thing, and then holy crap, it became a big thing. The second time I saw it was with the adoption of cloud, and everybody sort of said, oh, this is actually a much bigger transformation than I thought, and it cuts across a lot of different things. I'm seeing sort of early inclinations of that same type of behavior, that this is actually not just a security thing, happen around AI.
I'm going to take a question from the audience because I really like it. And for those of you on the line, please keep adding those. We'll get to that throughout the conversation. And if we don't get to it through the conversation, I'm going to leave about 5 minutes at the end, for an open Q&A. But let's talk through this. So with the sheer scale of AI-driven threats, phishing attacks alone are getting smarter and way more frequent. It feels like it's going to get way worse before it gets better. For both of you panelists, what keeps you up at night, and where do you see AI being most helpful as a defensive posture?
I love this. Look, I spoke with an entrepreneur yesterday. I'm not going to mention the company, but he's building AI-driven cyber weapons. Okay, this is happening, whether you like it or not. So it's an acceleration function for, in this case, it's for the good guys, but for the threat actors as well as for everyone else. So, that keeps me up awake at night. I mean, that's scary stuff. And the easiest way to apply it, we've already seen elements of it, is in that space of phishing. I honestly believe that training human beings is kind of a waste of time nowadays, to be quite honest, at least to defend against phishing attacks and whatnot. The reason is that if you think about a nice little LLM that's going to be able to look across your Facebook profile, extract word hierarchies, supplement it with paid information from various information brokers, look at your Facebook live, and then it can emulate basically anybody in your life depending on what they're trying to do, whether it's scam you or at a personal level or compromise your companies or whatnot. The automation is not rocket science. And now if you augment that all of a sudden with audio deepfakes and video ones, and we've seen evidence of that it publicly. I think we heard about I think it was a Hong Kong company. It was basically deepfaked. But I've seen evidence of that going back over a year, exactly that same pattern, that this same criminal organization has been doing that. So we are going to see an acceleration of that democratization. I would say the biggest threat that I see is actually against, I would say, the elderly getting scammed individuals. They're already very susceptible to scams. And now all of a sudden, just imagine getting a call and it sounds exactly like, your granddaughter all of a sudden saying that she's just been kidnapped and they need to send some Bitcoin somewhere. It's like this is just, it's horrific if we think about the ability to manipulate people that are not prepared for this technology and that can't.
Pretty spooky. Bob, what keeps you up at night? Same question to you.
So yeah, I think the arms race of sort of attackers and defenders, like it's going to be nuts. The Hong Kong story was a great example. Basically, this was an attack on a business where the attackers triggered, I think it was a Microsoft video chat and deep faked the audio and video of a couple officers and tricked the CFO into wiring out like 25 million bucks. And you've got sort of personal versions of this as well, where people are sort of doing this type of thing against individuals. Just a little random personal story when my family got together over Christmas, we all picked sort of a common family password that, like, if one of us ever calls somebody in sort of distress, like we basically picked a common family password that's one that we would know. So I think we're all just going to have to adopt in our sort of personal lives, little things like that, or in our work lives to do that. The other thing that we've not talked about that actually kind of freaks me out is the industrialization of exploits. So if you think about, like, most large enterprises run on a tremendous pool of open source software, Linux, containers, Kubernetes, like huge pools of open source software. Well, guess what? All that software is sitting up in GitLab or GitHub. And, the dark AI can basically point at all that scanned software and industrialize the process of finding exploits to use to be able to attack and get into businesses. This used to be only reserved for kind of nation state level attackers. And most CISOs were like, look, if Russia's going to come after me, I'm not going to get fired because nobody can defend against Russia. Well, the problem now is going to be that any attacker is going to be able to take advantage of these types of tools, and it's really going to industrialize the discovery of exploits and the discovery of vulnerabilities and the building of exploits. Like it's going to get nuts.
The entrepreneur I spoke with yesterday about AI generated cyber weapons and stuff, that's exactly what he does. Let's just basically analyze the code and find new and interesting vulnerabilities.
I really like that, family common password. It's a good tip for those on the line as a security measure. You can take it home.
That's an easy one. The other one, quite frankly, is have some trusted out-of-band verification for critical things.
Yeah. Totally.
My entire family, we all use Signal, not because it's spooky and encrypted, and I think it's cool, which it is, but because it creates a trusted relationship, whereas anything with SMS is so easy to spoof, basically. So we use that for internal business processes as well. It's free, basically. It's a good hack if you don't want to use a password.
Let's shift a little bit to VC investment, IPOs, investment sector. Patrick, according to our data, and I think any data out there, Sin Ventures is at the very top of the list for deal count in terms of cybersecurity investments over the last few years. Is there something that you or the rest of the team at Sin think about as an underappreciated but really interesting sector?
Underappreciated but really interesting.
Give us your secret investing. thesis?
I think the secret to investing is really looking for companies that are solving material problems, doing it with defensible IP, doing it in a different way versus everyone else, making sure that the everyone else crowd, because within cybersecurity, you have various sectors basically, that you don't have hyper competition in that space and you're able to differentiate yourself. I think that's key. Because right now, with over 5,000 some odd different cybersecurity companies, depending on who you talk to in terms of getting that the count, basically, everybody's screaming for attention at the same time, and it's very difficult for any company to break through. So you need to have a different angle. You need to have defensible IP. You need solving a meaningful problem to be able to have a chance of getting any kind of visibility side of the virus.
The converse of that question, is there a sector or a sort of company that either of you think is overhyped in the cyberspace? So you see these and, you can't help an eye roll, something that's passé, or you think is quite not, not ready for prime time, but people are pushing on you.
I mean, it's like it is. We're in an AI bubble. It's a drunken frat party right now. Money is being thrown around like crazy. So
You mean a cyber AI bubble?
yeah,
Patrick?
AI, cyber AI, whatever you want to call it. Basically, I don't like cyber AI, but it's like whenever there is a situation when there's a huge amount of money sloshing around looking for opportunities, there are going to be people that take advantage of that. My standing joke, especially being here in Florida in the Miami area, is the easiest way to find a scammy AI company is if you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile and the last thing they did was a Web3 or Bitcoin related company. And I was like, there are people that are like jumping around from one bubble to the next.
Bob, same question to you.
Yeah, I agree. There's overhype in sort of the GenAI and security space. I think it's sort of natural at the beginning of any cycle. Just have to have a little patience for it to work itself out. I agree with Patrick. Some of the headwinds in the space are just sort of customer fatigue. They've got a lot of tools already. They don't need more tools. I think it's hard for new vendors to stand out, because what's happening is vendors are basically taking tools from off the shelf and just reassembling them in different ways. Very few companies actually have sort of net new capabilities that were sort of built from scratch that are defensible IP. BlueRock is one of them. It took us like 2.5 years to build the first version of our product, but I think that's a big deal. There's a small amount of silver lining in here that historically cyber budgets have been held flat, but I agree with sort of the data point in the survey that budgets are going to go up as a result of defending against GenAI and for GenAI. I've heard numbers between sort of 10 and 20%. So sort of tracks with the numbers that you guys published.
Yeah, I think ours said 13, but anywhere in there feels apt. Bob, you have a very successful fundraising track record, both for this company and the previous company, which you took public. I imagine many on the line are founders of companies in the cybersecurity space. Do you have any lessons that you share behind closed doors with other founder friends when approaching, the Patricks of the world?
Yeah. Two things come to mind. The first one, customer validation. It's really, 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 really important to have good customer validation for your idea and the interest in your idea. Not just for investors, but just for you as an entrepreneur to make sure you're spending your time on a problem that's actually worth solving and building a company around. The second one, and I'll say in advance, this one's probably going to be a little bit controversial, which is don't get ahead of yourself on valuation. It feels great in the moment to jack up your valuation and be like, thanks. But as an entrepreneur, when you do that, you're effectively promising perfect execution so that you can raise your next round at twice the valuation. Doing a down round later is painful, casts a shadow on the company and the team. It's much better to step up your valuation in logical increments. I once at Mobile Iron let my valuation get ahead of me, and we ended up having to do a flat round. If we had just stair-stepped all the way there, we would have gotten to the exact same place, but we would have felt a lot better about ourselves. So don't get ahead of yourself on valuation.
There's nothing controversial about what you said. 100% agree. It's just reality.
Yeah, I can see you agreeing. going back a bit to the CISO group, there was one data point I thought was maybe surprising, maybe even odd. 32% of the CISOs we surveyed said that AI was not in the top 5. Patrick, at the beginning of our conversation, you said we've seen this hype cycle before. I'm sure there's disillusionment. Do you chalk that 32% up to that disillusionment, or is there something else going on? What would you say to that group?
In reality, there are other like dumpster fires out there that are actually burning right now that require a lot of attention. Key one of them is everything around ransomware. I mean, ransomware just continues to increase year on year on year because it's such an effective business model. So it's back to what I said about the role of the CISO's force prioritization. And you actually have real attacks that you're defending against right now. They're, again, at least this year, they don't seem to be going after the AI models, but they sure as heck are monetizing themselves, attacking in other ways and infiltrating environments and whatnot. So it's like you have to be very real around where are you actually seeing the threats right now, prioritize. The other dimension is that a lot of CISOs are still coming from behind, meaning that they inherited infrastructures that are legacy oriented, that have old controls built in, that are not well maintained. And for them, the struggles are the basic existential struggles around patch management or vulnerability management, identity and access management, et cetera. So these are all like, almost think about it like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those are at the very bottom of the pyramid before you go up to some of the higher order things like AI-oriented attacks that kind of maybe a little bit more at the tip of the spear. So they have to force prioritize the day-to-day operational blocking and tackling activities for securities that is required by their business, and that's also required by regulators.
I agree and disagree there, Patrick, actually, interestingly. I do agree that it's sort of a forced prioritization, and there's a lot of other bigger dumpster fires out there. The thing where I think might be different is that GenAI in some ways sort of feels like mobile to me, that end users can actually adopt it and bring it in via shadow IT. And so I think CISOs can kind of put their head in the sand a little bit on it, but what's starting to happen is individuals are signing up for their own OpenAI account and pumping enterprise data out into it. And all of a sudden, people are going to have the oh crap moment. Like maybe it's not an official project that I have to get my arms around as a CISO that's an official dumpster fire, but I think there's going to be a big shadow IT shadow fire on people that are just sort of adopting it guerrilla style, much like sort of mobile was adopted in the early days. So, just to give you sort of an example, my son, his internship is working for an old school paper products company in the upper Midwest, working on their GenAI and LLM projects. So it's I think the CISO's hands are going to get forced in the next 24 months, whether they want to or not.
They will. But back to the force prioritization, it's the likelihood and the magnitude of an event happening.
Totally fair.
The likelihood of you being targeted by ransomware and losing millions of dollars, pretty damn high.
Pretty high.
And we talked about loss of IP via GenAI and maybe pollution and blah blah blah. All of these threats, they're still kind of in the hypothetical. We don't have decent data around it, so that's kind of what I meant. I'm not disagreeing with you, Bob.
Sure.
I think AI security is going to increase over time as we get more data points as to the actual risks. But right now, a lot of it is still speculative.
Since we're speculating about the future, maybe a shadow fire is coming for CISOs, maybe not. We'll have to wait and find out. Want you both to get the crystal balls out. Think about or give an example or two of a privately held cybersecurity company that you think is going to have a really killer year in 2025. Would love to just hear some examples of companies you're keeping your eye on.
Besides Wiz.
Wiz, I think, is probably top of many lists.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go first. I mean, I have to promote my own portfolio here as well. So, one of our great investments is a company called Halcyon, and all they do is basically comprehensive anti-ransomware. It's detection, it's blocking, it's a built-in recovery of key materials that allow you to unencrypt it in case something happens to get through. So it's an entire platform for resilience as well, not just the traditional anti-malware type of a component. They're absolutely on fire. Their growth has been absolutely amazing. And again, it reflects that prioritization that ransomware is just not something you can avoid in your priorities.
Bob,
Yeah,
you
they've
can
got
take
a killer.
BlueRock
They've got a
too.
killer CRO too, Jeff Williams. He's
Williams.
awesome. Yeah, I'll defer to Patrick on that. He's got a portfolio. I got my company, so
I'll plug it for you. BlueRock, I think, is one to keep your eye on for all in the audience.
yes, of course, BlueRock. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Maybe a question about M&A, and Patrick, feel free to lead. Yeah, we've seen some, M&A activity in the last few years. Gem Security to Wiz, Silk Security to Armis, but very little to no IPO activity. Do you expect any cyber IPOs in the next 12 to 18 months? Why not?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot around just timing the markets right now. But Arctic Wolf has been rumored, basically. It really feels like they've been prepping themselves. I know they halted trading of secondaries for their employees. So that's the one. I love the company. I think they're doing extraordinarily well, great leadership. So I'm very much looking forward to that IPO.
What do you think are the biggest both headwinds and tailwinds in the space? Still, if you're advising your companies a year from now, what do we think about things like, I don't know if CHIPS Act has, if they, obviously, as Gerald mentioned, there's, public events going on that might have an impact here. What do you want to be on the lookout for as a company in the space?
Maybe I'll start, Bob.
Yeah, go for it.
Headwinds are, and I'm starting to see those reflected in articles, starting to be skeptical about the magnitude and speed of the investments versus the ROI. So money's being pumped into everything AI, but we're going to have to show some elements of return at some point in time. So it's like that is, so there's a lot of faith placed in AI companies, but right now, the ones that I'd be betting on are kind of like the Levi Strausses of the world that basically supplied the gold rush. In other words, it's going to be the NVIDIAs and the others that are going to be on the back that, regardless of the success of the business models built on these AI platforms, will make money nonetheless. But there is going to be a reckoning around what are we getting for all of this money that we've invested.
Bob, anything to add?
From my end, like I think the headwinds are things I've talked about before: customer fatigue, standing out, being unique, cyber budgets, and with Patrick, sort of some of the hype cycle around this. I think some of the tailwinds. Look, one of the tailwinds in cyber is there's always going to be another nasty attack, and sort of I think that's just going to accelerate. The other sort of tailwind is kind of a macro thing, which is I just love these periods where there's like high rate of change. I just love it. Like mobile, huge rate of change, huge rate of change. And I think GenAI will be the same thing. It unlocks innovation, great new companies get built. Like it's just spectacular. It's when some of the most fun of being an entrepreneur is. And the other macro thing is just at a people level, we have a technology native generation of Gen Zers that are really entering into the workforce right now that are going to be kind of the next tailwind of entrepreneurs to take advantage of all this new stuff that's coming out. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Love that.
On the tailwind side, I hate to say this, but I think regulations could be a tailwind. We're seeing the EU AI Act, and we're seeing, it's like whenever something is hot and bubblish, basically, it's an opportunity for various regulators and legislators to try to stand out and make it appear they're doing something to make the world a better place. So I do see we're going to see more. I think we're going to see more constraints from a regulations perspective placed on AI, which is going to further drive investments in various governance and security tools around AI.
Final call for those in the audience. If you want a question or a topic that we haven't gotten to, please feel free to type that now in the chat. I do see one that we hadn't addressed earlier, so I'll ask that to you both now. Wendy was asking for some specific ideas of a tool or a best practice to identify and address an AI attack. Do you have any, especially short-term prevention and detection tools if you're looking to catch up?
As a specific tool, I mean, it's like the question is very broad in terms of what an AI attack is. I mean, there are plenty of tools out there that look at bots, basically. When we think about like an AI or anything being attacked right now, it's not going to be a human sitting at a keyboard typing things in. It's going to be an automated routine of some kind. It's going to have a different fingerprint in its behavior than a normal human would, and it is detectable. So, assuming that there is separation, meaning you're hosting an environment. So, the front line of defense, I think, would be bot detection and mitigation. Companies like Human Security could be extremely useful.
Great. Well, I think that actually takes us to the end of our, oh, I see one more actually. Let me take this really quickly. Is AI and GenAI truly shadowing dangerous cyber attacks?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I read that poorly, huh? Is AI and GenAI truly overshadowing current dangerous cyber attacks? I think that's a challenging one to answer, unless someone has an immediate thought.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Look, there are going to be dangerous cyber attacks that are going to be related to either generated by AI or targeting AI, but there's also going to be dangerous cyber attacks that don't. And dangerous cyber attacks are dangerous cyber attacks, no matter where they come from. So I think, it's going to be important for security professionals and non-security professionals to always be vigilant defense. The thing that I do think people need to be prepared for is the sheer scale and industrialization of the attacks that's going to happen with AI. I don't think we've really quite gotten our heads around what that's going to feel like. So,
to elaborate on that, it's all a function of economics at the end of the day. And whenever you can drive automation in something, it allows you to go broader and broader in terms of who you target and who you attack. And I keep hearing people say in their personal lives, who is going to want to target me? I'm just such an insignificant individual. And it's like, that's the wrong way of thinking. When the cost of attacking you starts approaching zero, then everybody will be attacked because you are part of their profit model. It's like, if the cost declines, you can go broader and broader. You don't have to be narrowly focused anymore. And I think that's what Bob was referring to as the industrialization.
yes, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you both to Bob and Patrick, and then my colleagues, Andrew and Gerald. This has been a great conversation. We really appreciate you all joining, and I'll do a callback to if you'd like to have a conversation about the report, anything that we've mentioned. You have our email address on that previous slide. Please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation. Take care. Thanks for everyone for joining.